that's why Nietzsche, he just said that consciousness is the most calamitous stupidity by which we shall someday perish. That was uplifting, right? So
that's as Nietzsche often was. He was to the point and uplifting. Yeah,
I was like, dude.
Sheldon Solomon is a psychologist and professor of social psychology at Skidmore College. Sheldon is the father of terror management theory, which is the study of the impact of unconscious death awareness and how this leads to behavior modification in our daily lives. Sheldon is the co-author of a fascinating book, The Worm at the Core. This book goes deeper into the impact of unconscious death anxiety and the work on psychological testing he and his team have done. All this builds upon the very important work of Ernest Becker, who was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for his book, The Denial of Death. It is the second time we talk with Sheldon, and we have to admit he is truly our favorite psychologist. We believe that his work is absolutely crucial if we want to understand why we behave the way we behave and why we have ended up in this current mess. In this episode, we explore the following topics. What is the impact at global scale of the gigantic death reminder, which is COVID-19? Why reflecting on death is essential if we want to change our world for the better? How Sheldon tried to explain terror management theory to the world leaders and ended up in Guyana? What did Jordan Peterson told Sheldon to do and what Sheldon thinks of it? Please support the show by liking and sharing this episode on social media. And to make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes, sign up for our newsletter at deafandguard.com. It would also be a massive help to us if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can do right now by simply clicking the subscribe button. Now, let's delve into this episode, reflecting on death to make our world a better place.
I'm extremely happy to have you back. We started this show like 3 years ago, and I have to tell you, I think we mention your name every time almost, in every episode, I think. And Keith he's a witness as well. Every time we said, oh, Sheldon is saying this, or Sheldon is, you're our idol, I think, or something like that.
Oh, well, thank you.
We started with this terror management theory. We didn't know it that well at the time. And the more and more we went into this discussion with so many different people, the more and more we said, oh, it's actually true. It's the most important theory for us.
It keeps popping up.
Exactly.
You go down a particular avenue of thought, and down every avenue and every cul-de-sac, there's a bit of terror management theory in there somewhere.
Well, I would agree with that. And I say that with a bit of humility, because terror management theory is not our idea. We got it from Ernest Becker, who wrote the book, The Denial of Death. And, when he said in the 1970s that our disinclination to die underlies a substantial proportion of human activity, at first I was like, no, that can't be. But then the same thing happened. I started to think about it, and I was like, wow, this guy may be right. And then, terror management theory was just our effort to see if the ideas held up from a traditional scientific perspective. So now there's like over 1,000 studies, but many of them done by other folks. And so far, everything that we have looked at suggests that existential concerns just permeate human affairs. And this is not to say that everything that people do is the result of death anxiety. That's never been the point, so much as that if you don't consider the role of death anxiety in human behavior, then you can understand almost nothing, particularly what's going on around us today. That would be my view.
This is exactly why you're here, actually, because part of your experiments are about reminding people unconsciously about death, right? And you see a change of behavior, people clinging more to their culture, to the system of belief, having this defense mechanism to push the idea of death. So they change behavior. And here we have this gigantic global experiment where everyone suddenly is reminded unconsciously or consciously about death. And we were very curious to know with Keith is, okay, what happens now? You know, like what, from your academia or perspective, what do you see happening on Earth?
Well, you don't need me because you just really, very eloquently articulated what we believe is happening, and that is that the virus is the biggest mortality salience manipulation in the history of humankind, at least while we've been alive. Maybe when the meteor hit Earth and exterminated the dinosaurs, that might have been a rather radical death reminder also. But, after September 11th, 2001, Jeff and Tom and I were asked by the American Psychological Association to write a book about terrorism. And we did, and we said kind of the same thing, that the events of September 11th would constitute a very potent reminder of death, both literally and symbolically, and that what we should expect, therefore, is an amplification of the same kind of defensive reactions that death reminders evoke in our laboratory studies. This is almost doubly true. I don't know, I don't want to quantify the degree of existential distress, but the pandemic is even more pervasive and even more directly threatening to a larger chunk of humanity. And in our last book, The Worm at the Core, when we're writing about our terror management theory research, we're like, well, all right, how do we think about the different kinds of reactions to death reminders? And so we were like, well, all right, one thing is that it magnifies our hostility to other people who are different. So our original intent was, how come we can't get along with people who don't share our views? And of course, Becker's point is that if you accept the validity of somebody else's belief system, then you undermine the confidence with which you subscribe to your own. And that's why when we run into people that are different, we belittle them and we try and badger them into adopting our beliefs. And if that doesn't work, we just fucking kill them, proving our God is better after all. Well, sure enough, when we remind people of death, they become more hateful and hurtful towards people that are different. When we remind people that they're going to die, they become more fond of populist leaders, people who often claim that God has chosen them to rid the world of evil. When we remind people that they're going to die, they become very uncomfortable with their bodies, and they become very uncomfortable with nature, and they're very willing to exploit the natural environment. When we remind people that they're going to die, they tranquilize themselves with the trivial, as Kierkegaard put it. They drink more alcohol, they consume more drugs, they watch more television, they buy more stuff, not because they need it, they're just literally kind of distracting themselves with the infinite quest for money and stuff. And when people are reminded that they're going to die, well, that magnifies all existing forms of psychological disorders. That's precisely what we're seeing happening now. So just speaking from my perspective in the US, hate crimes are way up. Anti-Semitism was way up even before the race riots. And here's Trump, stoking racial resentment, and it's going to get ugly. So that's one thing that's happening. Charismatic leaders, not only here in the United States, but in Europe, are also still held in incredibly high regard, despite the fact that they've been profoundly incompetent with regard to their handling of the virus. People continue to drink more, to shop more, to piss on the environment more. And rates of anxiety and depression and every other psychological dis-ease. I want to put a comma between dis and ease to suggest that this is not a medical problem per se. What I would say so far is that for the most part, every phenomenon that we've produced in the lab documents the way that people respond to conscious and non-conscious intimations of mortality we see playing out right now. It would be unfortunate, though, to suggest that this is unequivocally and always negative. It is also the case.
I think we lost Sheldon.
I think we lost it. Yeah.
He was coming up with a good point there.
Fuck. It was another positive.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
we've
so
lost it. He's
we lost
gone.
him.
He'll probably call back in.
Yeah.
We're waiting.
Oh.
I'm going to have to trim this in a few weeks when I have that bit of work coming up.
My friend,
I'm getting quite attached to it.
You look like a sage or like a wizard or something.
I always said to my kids when they were younger, I said, eventually I want to grow a big Gandalf beard.
Sheldon?
Yes, that was me.
What happened, my friend? We lost you. You were in a role, in a very good point you were making.
Yeah, it was great. Now I stopped listening to myself. What I was blubbering about, and I do think that this is important because our original interest when we formulated terror management theory was to understand, why people at their worst are kind of hateful, warmongering, proto-fascist, plundering the planet in our insatiable quest for dollars and dross in a Facebook and Twitter stupor. And for sure, that is one kind of reaction when existential anxieties are aroused. But back to what I was saying when I lost you all, if you think about our studies, the death reminders in them are kind of subtle and fleeting. Think about that you're going to die, or we interview somebody in front of a funeral parlor, or we blast the word death for 28 milliseconds so fast that you can't even see anything. There's a long tradition in philosophy and theology and literature, along the lines of Albert Camus, when he said, come to terms with death. Thereafter, anything is possible. And my hope, and this may sound naive, but unfortunately, it may take the combination of a worldwide pandemic on top of an economic collapse, on top of race riots in the U.S. and ethnic cleansings in Europe. Plus the fact that, by the way, not to sound like the prophet of doom, but the pandemic is going to be like a headache compared to the malignant tumor of what's about to befall us vis-a-vis climate change in the next decade. But it may be, when Camus says, come to terms with death, thereafter anything is possible. I don't know how anyone, unless you're just willfully ignorant or intellectually dormant and emotionally stunted, how could you not notice right now that we're just permeated with death reminders, literally and symbolically. Maybe that's what we need. You know, you go back to Plato in the allegory of the cave, when he describes the average individual as dreaming while awake. He's like, it is time to wake up. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe enough people can step back and consider the extent to which a lot of our behaviors are driven by unconscious death anxiety. And so I'm wanting to have it both ways. What I would like to propose is, on the one hand, yeah, the pandemic is really bringing out the worst in people, but my hope is it can bring out the best in us also.
I think, you know, what you mentioned is so true, because, you know, it's the difference between death reminders and conscious death reminders, like these seconds, and what we call death reflections.
Yes.
Death reflection, which I think there's many studies which have made on death reflection. When you consciously think about death, like consciously, and your own death, and you take the time to reflect on that, that causes a change of behavior where you go towards your values and much more openness. And this is what we've seen here during these times, because here in France, and I assume in the US is the same, some people said, oh, hold on a minute, you know, what am I doing here? What do I want? You know, let's go to the countryside. Let's slow down. And you've seen this kind of people. And at the same time, I've read just an article that shows that the swimming pool constructions, like people buying swimming pools, have risen by 30% at the moment. So like the environment, fuck off. We don't care. We want more swimming pool right now. So it's, you know, you have these two tendencies.
That's correct.
On the news as well, you have philosophers that says, oh, by the way, all these behaviors is because we don't accept our mortality and we need to think about death. You know, I've seen that.
Yes.
Still, I think it's minority here. You know, what you explain here is not properly understood, and I don't know if people are willing to go there because it's too damn scary, I guess.
Well, I think that's part of it. Is it's not even. I think for many, it's not even about a willingness.
Yeah.
It's like they are in the grip of terror.
Absolutely.
And when they're in the grip of that terror, they immediately clutch at safety. And that is all of these distractions and everything that makes us forget about that thing we don't want to look at.
Yes, Keith. And of course, this is ironic because, as terrifying as it is to be terrified, we need to, psychologically speaking, be open to that emotion long enough to transcend it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. This is the thing, and I think I can't remember what it was, and it came up in a conversation Olivia and I had previously. It's whether or not we're actually constructed that we can actually find a way out of that, because this terror is very much a limbic system response.
That's right.
Prefrontal cortex shuts down. How do we get out of that grip of the limbic system? Because it takes a detachment. It takes a stepping out of it. How do we do that when we're in that limbic grip?
All right. Now, to be silly, if I could answer that question, you know, I'd be chugging rum out of a coconut. With my Nobel Prize.
I'm throwing it out there as a discussion point, as opposed to hoping you can answer it, Sheldon.
Well, but you know, there's no harm in asking what I would argue are the key questions in terms of most important and most timely. So that is the key question. You know, can we do it? You know, that's why Nietzsche, you know, he just said that consciousness is the most calamitous stupidity by which we shall someday perish. That was uplifting, right? So
that's as Nietzsche often was. He was to the point and uplifting. Yeah,
I was like, dude. But you know, this was one of Ernest Becker's points at the end of his book, Escape from Evil. Becker's like, look, he starts the book by saying, I'm pessimistic, but I'm not cynical. By the end of the book, he's like, well, I don't know if humans are a viable form of life. His view, and this is in the 1970s, was that if one of the unfortunate byproducts of our humanity is an incapacity to tolerate other people, who are different. And then in addition to that, we have to take our death anxiety and project it onto other individuals that we declare to be the all-encompassing repositories of evil. So Becker's point was, even if we didn't have enemies, we would make them, because we need to have some place to focus our death anxiety. So he was like, wow, it could be that the only reason we're still here is that we don't have the technological capacity to exterminate ourselves. He also understood that the insatiable desire for money and stuff, which he insisted is a manifestation of death anxiety. He was like, look, any natural desire has an upper limit. You might like pizza, but after like 12 slices, you're like, oh, I've had enough. Or you might like beer, or I like chocolate, but after a 55-gallon drum of M&Ms, I've like, oh, I've had enough. The only two things that there's never enough of is money and stuff. You ask the richest people on earth, what are you going to do tomorrow? And they're like, oh, I'm going to make more money. If you ask the average American who's at a shopping place, oh, what are you getting? They're like, oh, stuff. And it's like, what are you going to get tomorrow? It's like, more stuff. So the point that Becker made was that and he just said insatiable desires are fundamentally unstable, because there's no place at which you can ever say that you've had enough. And so here's Becker in the 1970s saying, between war and insatiable conspicuous consumption, I could see us being doomed. I mean, that's the downside. And the upside, without, again, sounding naive, is that, historically, we've extricated ourselves from a lot of difficulties once we have gotten a critical mass of people to agree about what underlies them. So the plague, killed half of Europe in the Middle Ages. As long as we thought that it was the result of evil spirits, we didn't get anywhere. But then we figured out that it's bacteria that gives us modern medicine and why most of us are still alive today. The hope here is, I think you said this earlier, Keith, is that wouldn't it be awesome if these ideas could get into broad enough circulation that a critical mass of the folks on Earth are able to reflect on them? To me, I see that as our role. Not because we want to be rich and famous. Quite the contrary. Again, Ernest Becker in the Escape from Evil book, he's just like, I wish every head of state was familiar with these ideas. Why aren't we talking about this at the United Nations? And did Greg Bennett tell you about our World Leaders Project?
Since you've mentioned Sheldon, I'll tell you that Sheldon told me that when he first read Otto Rank, he described it as, it's circular nonsense.
That's very good.
Thank you.
Did Greg Bennett tell you about our World Leaders Project?
Tell us more about that.
Okay, so if you guys have too much free time, I think the website is still there. It's called the World Leaders Project.
Okay.
All right, so this is in the year 2000. Yeah, it's 2000. So back to Greg, he's like, we need to stop just doing academic conferences. That's just it's a non-pharmacological intervention for insomnia, and we're not going to get anywhere. And I'm like, all right, dude, what do you want to do? And he's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get a list of the leaders of every country on earth, and we're going to write to them. And if you email me, I'll send you the letter. So we're going to write to them, and we're going to say, we want to come talk to you about these ideas, because we think that people in positions of power should be conversant in these notions. So anyway, I was just getting to know Greg at this time. So I was in Seattle. I get on a plane and I'm like, oh, thank God, this guy's a lunatic. I'll never see him again. And then the next morning, you know, he sends me a letter that he drafted to world leaders that was quite brilliant. So to make a long story short, this was back in the days of letters and fax machines. We send a letter to every world leader, and within hours, we get a barrage of responses, all of them negative. Basically, you know, mainland China will fucking kill you if you want to talk about peace and ideas. The United States, peace is not good for business, fuck off. Luxembourg sent us a letter of protest. They said, we are offended that you have the gall to even approach us. And so, and then out of no place, we get a fax, and it's from Guyana in South America. And it says, the president will see you next Tuesday. So anyway, we fucking fly to Guyana. And I even wore a tie. You can see it's the only one I have. Yeah, we fly to Guyana, and then we go to the presidential palace, and there's guys with machine guns, and we're like, we're here to see the president. And they're like, no, you're not. And then they look, and they're like, fuck, I guess you are. So next thing we know, we're talking to the president of Guyana, a young gentleman, a brilliant gentleman. And he was very receptive to these ideas and pointed out quite poignantly that he's eager to be in a position where he can engage with them. But that would be 5 minutes after the economic infrastructure of Earth has been modified somewhat to allow a modicum of access to the material resources necessary for people to eat. And so his point was, yeah, I think what you guys have to say is very important, but he felt that equally important at the time, and this was in 2000, and it was in the year 2000, I'm pretty sure, or 2001. But his point is that we need to work on the fact that the multinational global economy is just a thinly veiled effort to suck resources from the many to the few. And of course, he was right. And we never got back to, we have been meaning ever since, this being Greg and I, to revisit that effort. And again, not to draw attention to ourselves, because I have no desire. Do you know the guy, Jordan Peterson, the Canadian guy?
Yeah.
And so we go way back, and I saw Jordan Peterson a few months before he got incredibly famous, and we agree about almost nothing politically.
Well, he said, by the way, but you're wrong.
You hear the terror management theorists, for example, and they have this idea that your meaning representation, the story you tell about the world, regulates your death anxiety. It's something like that. But that's not right. I mean, it's close to right, and it's a smart idea. It came from Ernest Becker, by the way, who wrote a book called The Denial of Death, which is actually quite a good book, even though it's wrong. You know, sometimes a book can be very useful. It can be usefully wrong, and Becker's book is usefully wrong.
He said we were wrong in the 1980s, and with all due respect, I disagree. And I think that, but that doesn't matter. The bigger point is that Jordan's a smart guy. People of goodwill can disagree about lots of things. He said to me at the time, he's like, dude, what's wrong with you? You know, you're a good bullshitter, and you should be, every time you say something, you have to have a phone in front of your face and post it on YouTube. I have 200,000 followers, and make a short story long, and you know this, within a year, he's the most popular and wealthy so-called public intellectual. But my point is that I have no desire to be a popular icon for anything. I think that distracts from the value of the ideas. It's also why I don't have shoes, and he probably has as many as he needs. I see our role, and that you all are in a great position to, just to seriously engage with these ideas, in the service of casting them out, not to declare them to be unequivocally true so much as important enough to be worthy of our collective cogitation. I do think that's important.
The thing is, Sheldon, is for us, we try to engage with these ideas because we fundamentally believe that we need to reflect. So have a reflection, and because that makes us better humans, really.
That's right.
The thing is, we tried for 3 years, right now. So we have 3 years. It's so depressing to see how many people engage with that. But we still have a small followers, and it's growing, and surely it's growing. The thing is, you're doing this for more than 20 years now, like 30 years.
Yeah.
And you have your worldview, and I follow you a little bit, is more and more depressing in terms of, okay, this is the future. This is what we look like. We are fucked in terms of environment. And I kind of agree with you, because looking at what's happening in terms of global warming and everything, how do you cope with that? How don't you just say, fuck it, let's drink my way out, how do you still continue? Is it your meaning? How do you do it?
How do you stave off your own terror?
Yeah.
Well, no. Look, it's a great question. So one way, and this sounds silly, but Jeff and Tom and I, for 40 years, we have joked that terror management theory has been an intellectual exercise that ironically allows us to escape thinking about these ideas by treating them as intellectual abstractions.
Yeah.
Right? That's nothing to be proud of.
No, that makes sense.
But it does make sense, and I don't dispute that. So that's one possibility. Getting back to the value of these kinds of exchanges, I'm uplifted just by these kinds of conversations with like-minded people, even if we are the tiniest of minorities in terms of the percentage of earthlings who traffic in these notions. One of the things, there's a dead guy I like, Henry Miller, who wrote novels before you guys in the 1950s and 1940s. And one of the things he writes about after World War II, he says, look, everybody would like things to be better. Well, not everybody, but let's assume that some people, but it would be unfortunate to assume that any of us are going to have the effects of like Jesus or Moses or Martin Luther King. And so realistically, most of us are not going to affect these wholesale transformations. Moreover, Miller argued, that's not the way things really change. Things really change if you step back historically because of the concerted efforts of innumerable people that are probably never acknowledged for having done anything of value. And so his point is that you may be like saying to yourself, oh, well, I haven't fucking done anything, but you don't know whether or not you've done anything. And whoever said that the world has to change overnight. So maybe you guys are doing your podcast, and maybe here I am, blubbering, and maybe there's a young person out there who's never heard of these ideas and just says, wow, this is remarkable. Maybe that's going to be the next transformational leader, but we may be long dead and never know that really that one consequence of this conversation was that it inspired a single person who goes on to fix Earth. You know, it sounds like a Netflix movie.
Yeah, that's exactly.
It's the whole butterfly effect concept, isn't it? It's just small little thing here. Eventually,
that's
if
right.
That small thing hadn't have happened, then this big thing that happened all this time later would never have happened.
Precisely. So
the whole chaos theory concept is we just don't know the impact of one thing on another.
There you go. So and that's precisely what Henry Miller's saying way back in the day. All right. So we got, I'm distracting myself with our work. We have the idea that maybe something of value could come of this. I'm still somewhat gratified by the possibility that people are about to, I'm just speaking in the US, but hopefully this can rub off. It could be that this is a real turning point in terms of race relations in the US. And you can't solve racial problems in the United States without addressing structural inequalities in economic institutions. And so we're dangerously close to a point on this end of the pond where conservatives as well as liberals are thinking about a guaranteed income. The reason that people are starving on Earth is not from a lack of food. There's plenty to eat. It's the result of our unimaginative efforts at distribution. And so maybe we could lapse into humanity momentarily enough to radically alter institutions. And I'm not advocating for a conservative or a liberal approach here. One of the things that I like about universal health care and a universal guaranteed income is that these were both ideas that originated by conservative political thinkers and have now been embraced by liberal ones. And so I find that uplifting. And then at the risk of sounding, I don't know what the right word would be, maybe naively sentimental, I'm just gratified, and I'm grateful and humble in the midst of all of this that I still have food to eat, a place to live, and am lucky enough by virtue of the technology that we're currently deploying to maintain connections with fellow humans that share my view of things. And I'm also, this will sound silly, but I've got the Apocalypse Fruit Grove in my backyard now. I started 3 years ago planting fruit trees. And so it'll take a while, but if you guys are hungry, I think 3 summers from now, you can come. Yeah, we'll have some cherries.
We will come, actually, Sheldon. We'll fly over, fuck the environment, just to come to
just for cherries. Yeah.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Again, please support the show by signing up at deathhangout.com or clicking on the subscribe button on your screen.